I am really excited to jump right into it. Our next panel is about building a marketing team for today's growth channels. And we have a group of retail leaders who really have been there and done that. My friend, Rob Schmults, he is an executive board member and operating partner with MidOcean Partners, private equity, and he's going to be leading this conversation. So thanks for everybody for joining us. Rob, go ahead and take it from here.
Awesome. And by the way, just while I have the mic, thanks right back to Scott and the entire Commerce Next team. I know personally, not just this event over the last 3 Wednesdays, but all through this COVID period, the hard work that these guys have put in to wrangle speakers, have really good sessions. It's made me feel much more connected to the broader community than I would otherwise. So huge shout out to those guys for some amazing work, and many thanks. Well, this is a great topic, partly because it never gets old. So we were talking about beforehand. I know I personally, I want to say I've been in 4, maybe 5 panels like this over the past few years, either as a moderator or a panelist. And that's not so much me like thumping my chest about how often I get asked to talk on this, but rather just, how often this is a topic that is being addressed. And I think part of the perennial relevance, one, obviously, there's such a velocity of change that everyone on this panel and probably everyone out there listening has experienced around what is marketing, and therefore, how does the organization look to best support that? But 2, there's also the fact that the broader organizations that marketing sits in are always different, and therefore the right org structure for that broader org, for that customer set, for that product, et cetera, is always different. So this is going to be one of those panels where, as excited as I am about all the wisdom and experience and lessons learned that you're going to hear from these guys, the answer is almost always going to be to every question, it depends. So with that caveat, we're going to dive right in. One thing, as I was just alluding to, about marketing organizations is the diversity of approaches. And in particular, there'll be roles, there'll be functions, there'll be work streams that at one organization are, oh yeah, that's definitely in marketing. And at another, oh no, that's over in the, et cetera group. And this ranges from things like customer data, which we've seen in many cases migrate out of IT and into the marketing org. E-commerce at one point was often, part of marketing or not part of marketing. Sometimes there's still some variability there. Sometimes brand and performance marketing can be split. The list really goes on here. And so with that caveat of it depends, I'd love to kind of get a sense of, is there an ideal combination of functions that really need to come together in the marketing org of today? And if so, why? So maybe Shawna, I'll start with you in the hot seat on that question. What's been your experience or point of view on that?
All right, thanks so much. Obviously there's lots to dig into here, but there's 3 points that I feel are really broadly applicable. And again, this is my point of view and what's working for me right now. But here's a go at it. Number 1, I would say that the days of e-commerce and marketing as separate functions are over. That's a thing of the past. In order to create a seamless customer journey, these 2 teams must be in lockstep with each other, absolutely symbiotic. Number 2. Analytics as a function needs to be a part of marketing. I really, truly believe it can't just be sitting over in IT. You need your analysts living and breathing marketing and e-commerce strategy, calendars, timelines, really living it day by day in order to truly be able to interpret what the data are telling them. And my third point in this topic really is that even with that, even if you have your analysts sitting in the team, it's not about having just one data person in marketing. Your entire team must be comfortable and literate with data. If you didn't have a chance to hear Charlie Cole speak earlier, go watch the video. He has a whole presentation on this topic. It's unbelievable. I mean, you have to just embrace it. Everything he's speaking the truth. And in my opinion, even your most creative thinker should be able to access and understand the key metrics that will help them refine their creative approach. So everybody really needs to understand data.
I love that, and I agree with you, by the way. And on watching Charlie's presentation, that was great and spot on, very germane to what we're talking about here. Well, let me tweak the question a little bit, and Jennifer, maybe I'll steer this to you. So part of as Scott introduced us, it's about sort of the growth marketing organization of the future, and looking forward, particularly given what many are calling the great acceleration that we experienced under COVID. What has changed, and maybe just as interestingly, what stayed the same? Love to get your thoughts on that from the UNTUCKit perspective, as well as your broader background.
Yeah, I think what's happening in marketing, and this is, I think some of it accelerated during COVID, but I think it's just been pretty profound over the last, 5 years or so, especially. It's just marketing is so broad now. So totally agree with all the points Shawna made about like analytics and the importance of data, but simultaneously, like that other end of the spectrum and creativity, I would argue, is even more important now than it's been before. Right before I came on this call, I saw a new Super Bowl ad from Logitech where they were really celebrating all of the creativity that's happening in people's houses right now during the time of COVID. And that was super inspiring. So I just think as marketing leaders, we need to be able to push both ends of the spectrum, the analytics and the creativity, because I think some of our differentiation will come from the data, but the brands I get really excited about, a lot of the differentiation and the buzz is coming from that creative side. So it's tricky as CMOs to knit it all together, but I also think that's the fun of the job.
Yeah, well, I love that too, and especially coming from a digitally native brand like UNTUCKit, I think you're not alone. It's not just creative; it's a lot of functions that at one point probably the e-commerce people spent a lot of time, not trying to minimize, but being all about data and all about conversion rates in e-commerce. And I think, as your comment illustrates, there's been a discovery or rediscovery of some of the old in quotes core marketing functions that still have incredible value today, like you pointed out. Well, everyone on this panel at different times has inherited, stepped in a new role and inherited an org. Shawna outlined some things that really need to be inside the organization. Jennifer, you appended to that and pointed out, you can't also lose sight of things like creative. What do you do, particularly when you come into a new role, or maybe when you've been in a role for a while, or frankly, things just changed, and now you realize that some function, some work stream is outside of your org, but it needs to be in your org? And Billy, maybe I'll steer that to you, because I know you've run into that more than once in your career, and love to kind of hear just kind of how you did that. Because generally, if you walk into someone's office and said, hey, by the way, these 5 people on your team, they really should be on my team, that isn't a great, way to build collegiality inside the organization.
Yeah, but put yourself on the other side of that equation, and how would you feel if somebody came in and said your people are going to report to me? I'm a big believer in teamwork, in cross-functional teamwork in particular, and good ideas come from anywhere. And so, to me, it might be less of the I have to own in order to be accountable, and it might be how can I bring, as I like to say, bring a friend. So how do I bring the creative lead along on the journey and make them more data informed? How do I take the financial person who clearly is more analytically oriented and get them to think more creatively? And how do I bring them along on the journey? When I was a CEO, I used to say, I really don't pitch me an idea one-on-one. I'd like you to bring a friend into the equation so that we can collaborate on a solution. And I think when you work through those sorts of opportunities, natural affinities oftentimes are one of the results. It could be that, hey, it does make sense to move this over time, or it makes sense to keep them separate because the personalities, the way they work together, the way they can operate, works more cohesively within an organization. So it's not a one size fits all. It's kind of, I'm not trying to cop out, but I think it's really important. I can tell you one of the breakthroughs earlier in my career was partnering with a creative lead on, hey, here are the results that we're seeing. Here's what's working that we are seeing in the data. How could we do more of this? And he became super interested in the information. Now, he didn't want to allow that to drive his creative output, but he wanted it to guide his creative output, and that became a really a real win. I think it unlocked a lot of opportunity for both of us, both within the marketing organization and for him creatively and what he could develop, and that was a real win. And the leadership saw that as a real positive byproduct within our organization, and something to model going forward.
Well,
can I build on that point?
Yeah, go ahead, Jennifer.
Because I think there's a tendency, especially as marketing becomes broader, to really silo in, and especially to protect the creatives. And what I found very consistently is great creatives love to see the impact of their work. They're inspired by the data. So I think it's a miss in so many organizations. They try to bifurcate things. And I think what we should be doing is actually knitting them together, because there's real power there.
Yeah, and what I love about that, Jennifer, and about what Billy was just saying, to back up your point, is because I've lived this too, right? And I saw other folks nodding. And Shawna, I'm going to ask you in a second to tell that story you told me, because you ran into this too. But I think people assume that other parts of the organization are living and breathing the exact same reality they are. And again, unless you go and share with your creative colleagues, or share with your customer support colleagues, or share with the folks in the warehouse, or et cetera, et cetera. And we as marketers have so much data to illustrate how well things are going, or how much of an improvement we've seen in X, or sharing the customer reviews so the product team knows, like, oh my gosh, you made that change and it really resonated. Don't assume everyone is watching the same metrics and dashboards that you are, because they're probably not. And being able to connect the dots for them is so powerful. And Shawna, I think you were sharing a story with me, literally, and it's not that we're picking on creative, as I tried to do a minute ago. It applies broadly, but I think you had a very similar experience with creative specifically as well.
Yeah, I did. A few years back, I was in a situation that was very different from what Billy experienced, where he was really able to bring people along and kind of develop that relationship over time, and thoughtfully bring the teams together. I took a role as head of e-commerce at Victoria's Secret, and it was about a year after the company had gone through that sudden and very massive restructuring, which I was in the news. I mean, I think very highly publicized. The moment when L Brands eliminated the Victoria's Secret catalog, so everyone took notice. And they took the DTC standalone business unit, broke it up into each individual brand. So now we had a situation where, Victoria's Secret brand e-commerce and the digital creative teams were now brought together under the brand CMO. So they were going from totally different business units into the same. And with all of these rapid changes, I'm coming in a year after this. And so for a year, people were like unclear on their roles and responsibilities, unclear, lots of insecurity, who owned what, who was the final decision maker. So when I arrived, that relationship between e-commerce and creative was so badly damaged that, even just simple civil conversations weren't really possible. So, I had to really think fast how to really repair this, because I knew where I wanted to get to, which is what we're all talking about. That relationship is so critical. And, luckily, most fabulous woman that I met in this, the head of creative, Sunny Stafford, who was running digital at Victoria's Secret at the time, she and I built a great relationship together, and we were able to kind of see that path forward. We started together to host roundtables and have these conversations. We bring in snacks, we bring in coffee. Everybody got together, and we were literally talking about everyone's hurt feelings and this lack of communication. It was literally like group therapy. So it wasn't, in that particular situation, the reorg had already happened, so it was already over. It wasn't about talking about org structure or how to do it this way or that way. It was really just about building that trust and that collaboration. So we had to sort of do it in reverse and on the fly. But in the end, because we did put the time into it and go through that, really processing what everyone was feeling, because at the end of the day, we're all people, and we all want to have these relationships, and we all want to get along and work together and collaborate, but you sometimes have to really do a lot of work to get to that place. It was very
Shawna, I think
interesting.
that story you just told, as well as the story Billy was sharing, I think we often lose sight of the fact that organization is essentially a communications function, right? If you really boil it down to its most basic, and it can either enable, or in some cases prevent communication, right? Oftentimes we see these organizational lines and then battle lines get drawn. And so I think the takeaway for everybody is, don't let the org structure get in your way, as Jennifer, Billy, and Shawna were all sharing, of you can still go talk to people that aren't literally in your organization. And in fact, it may be even more important that you overshare with those people, because that's going to be the way to prevent what Shawna just described from happening.
That's right.
Hey, so Vanja, I'm going to pull you in, because something you and I talked about a couple weeks back is, I think implicit in how you organize is also what work you're doing. And what we've seen over the years is, when we say the nature of marketing has changed, I think implicit and explicit in that is the nature of what marketers do has changed. And one of the things I thought you had some really interesting points of view on is this notion of, just because you've been doing X task for 15 years, or just because you had this group and they come in every day and it's time to make the donuts and then they leave, like, should you still be doing that? And the need to constantly be looking, not only am I doing the right work, but do I have the right people doing it, and am I using the right tools? So I hope I didn't trample your answer by over asking the question, but maybe take that and run with that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. We'll try. I'll do my best. So yeah, I mean, what I think, and I'm maybe in a little bit different position here. I work in product marketing at a tech company, but in that role, I've come across, multiple marketers at different clients that we serve throughout the past 7 years that vary in, maturity, size, and to what degree they are, D2C, if you want, versus enterprise. And what we see often is, yes, this like notion of how much you're willing to look into your workflows and recognize that something is outdated. And I mean, I speak for myself and my own team in that as well, that I sometimes catch myself, we just continue to do this because it's a weekly, because it's I don't know, it's been on our calendars and it's been templated and we invested a lot in that template and workflow, and you just continue doing it. And I think, to your point, Jennifer, I truly believe in creativity as well as the most important thing. But like, I think creativity has also been, and the whole like creative production process has been underserved in terms of like technology and automation. And there's a lot of opportunity there, that there's still a lot of repetitious manual work that people do. And I think there's a big opportunity for marketers, especially in the e-commerce world, where the last year, even more so than before, has put the tremendous amount of pressure to produce more, because more people are online. All the business needs to be done online. You need to market different products, different offers, different messages, change them overnight because it's lockdown. And
that's why creative is often at odds with the e-com team, because they're being asked to make 12 versions and then change them all 3 hours after the deadline.
Exactly. And there's technology that can help, and there's like different ways. There's, design tools, and I'm not going to go into self-promotion, but, even simple, code in Photoshop or Figma tools, but also like dedicated technology for that. Just like how there's a lot of, articles out there, how you can automate your life, auto payments that you set up. I think there's small opportunities in marketing organizations that can also, help you with that. However, and this is, what Rob and I talked about, what initially often starts as an efficiency game, or like even effectiveness, because you're, an e-commerce marketer and you need performance, you need more creative to test and improve and experiment, at least in my opinion, often ends up with some reorg, restructuring, workflow, change management as well. Because when you bring in a new technology, you inevitably need to change some workflows as well, which I think it's not necessarily, you shouldn't see that as a negative. And at the same time, having technology that helps you, manage the repetitive tasks, you are creating space for high value work.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times people, when you mention automation, especially in the context of creativity and marketing, it's like immediately you think, oh, are we going to get rid of designers or creatives? Not at all. You're just removing what they're not really, happy to do anyways. Nobody wants to pull all-nighters.
That's such an important point too, because I think there's nobody, and that includes the CMO, who wouldn't love to trade some low value tasks for some of the higher value tasks, some of the newer stuff that isn't getting done. Well, I'm going to keep an eye on time. We got about 10 minutes left. So far, just for those of you who are following along at home, we've talked about some of the key capabilities that need to be in marketing. So heard loud and clear and saw a lot of nods. E-commerce needs to be in there. Data analytics need to be in there. We also talked about the balance of skills, that even as we increasingly need our teams to be what I'll call analytically literate, and Shawna, I'm sort of putting those words in your mouth, but I think that's what you were guiding us toward. Jennifer reminded us too that we can't lose creativity. In fact, the strongest marketing is generally the marriage of those two things, as we're seeing over and over again. We also talked about how important communications are, and that in fact, even with a cruddy org structure, if you have good communications, you're probably going to be fine. Whereas you could try and design the world's most perfect org structure, and if you had bad communications, it probably wouldn't get you much. And then most recently, we just talked about the fact that you want to make sure you're doing the right work for today and tomorrow, not just the work that you have always done, and that you also want to make sure you're doing it in the right way. So how do you automate, as Vanja rightly pointed out, low value, repetitive tasks? Because those are automatable. You're going to create some change manage issues like she mentioned, but you're also going to be able to take probably those same people and make them feel a lot better about what they're coming in and doing every day. So with all that good stuff, who wants to be brave enough to volunteer? One thing you should never do is blank. Anyone want to share? And I won't make you all do it, but Billy, you look like you're already getting ready to lean in and share something. So maybe I'll pick on you.
No, I mean, I don't want to say one thing you should never, but
strongly
in marketing today, everything's measurable. And if you don't come in with a point of view on measurement, regardless of what it is, it's almost like the consulting case interview, where you'd like to think there's not a wrong answer or not a right answer, but at least having a point of view on what you think the answer should be or could be is the best place to start. If you come in and just say, hey, I want to spend this money with TikTok because it's a great emerging platform, it's really difficult to say, I'm just sitting on this bag of money. Here, go use it. You got to have a point of view of what you're going to get out of it. So I'd like to spend X because we're going to get Y. And it doesn't always have to be, Rob probably should stick his fingers in his ears, it doesn't always have to result in a immediate sale. It could be for awareness, and you have to have that point of view. It could be on acquisition, and you need to have a point of view on what the acquisition metrics are. It could be in support of a product launch, and it's a great way for reach. So it's that portfolio of options, but it can't just be, hey, this is cool. I think that's a hard sell.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I want to poke on that a little bit before I pivot to the final question, which I'm going to put out to the full panel. It's always easiest to say, have a point of view on how you're going to spend your, let's call it your media buys. But Billy, I think, and I want to know if I've got this right, that same mindset is also, here's why I need to hire this role, or here's why we need to add this capability, right? It's bring that to everything you do, because as you pointed out, everything is measurable, which can be a little bit scary, but it also gives you the ability to build that credibility with your CFO, with your CEO, with your board, and say, I said this was going to happen, and here's how I did. And by the way, you won't always get it right, but the fact that you'll be probably one of the few that's coming back to give yourself your own report card buys a lot of credibility, if I can get that word out.
100%. And even what Vanja was talking about from a creative perspective, it can't simply be, hey, let's add more media in X, Y, and Z. It has to come from someplace else. And that might be different skills or resources. And it can't simply be, I need more skills and resources. It has to come from someplace else. It's a fixed, finite amount of money. Now, if you prove that it adds value, you can get more. And I think that's usually the hard part, is how do I start? And testing is obviously the best way to get there, to prove to a CFO or a CEO that this is money well spent. Because I can tell you, as a former executive, if I got $1 to spend, a lot of people are going to fight for that dollar.
Yeah.
So
there's always opportunity cost.
You got to prove that this is money well spent, and here's why. And I think that business case development can seem overwhelming, but when you start to break it down, when you bring a friend, preferably someone who might have a finance in their title, that's a good thing. You're going to come forward and you say, look, we're going to run this. Here's the time period. Here's how we're going to score it. And most importantly, follow up.
All right.
The key is follow up.
I totally agree. So I'm gonna go with my final question, and I'm gonna start with Vanja. I think oftentimes, a panel like this, high volume, high bandwidth, lots of things are said. Sometimes some things are unsaid, et cetera. So for the sake of our audience, what's the one thing you want them to take away from this panel? It might have even been something you've already said. That's okay. It could be something new, although please don't introduce the concept of neural networking or, something crazy like that. But if you've got a sort of pithy takeaway on this topic of optimizing your marketing org, what might it be? And Vanja, if I can ask you to go first.
Yes, thank you. I would say the one thing to take away is creativity is important, and it can be automated too. Those two things are not, mutually exclusive.
Great. And as you said, it's the repetitive functions.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to fight to now break out with Jennifer, because I don't think you're saying the machine just makes all the creative decisions, but it's more, you can free up your creativity by automating
the creative process, or creative teams can get a good dose of automation as well.
Just trying to make sure we didn't trigger Jennifer. So
yes, Jennifer, no, I wouldn't want to do that. Jennifer.
Let me go to you. Yeah, she'll reach across.
Go ahead,
Jennifer. Let me go to you. What's your takeaway you want the audience to have?
You know what? It's still the beginning of a new year. I'm going to go in a slightly different direction. Get a side hustle. There's nothing that makes me better at my job than the work I do on the side, coaching early stage companies. It's super satisfying. It's super inspiring. We're actually incubating a company called Fair Harbor at UNTUCKit. So my whole team has a chance to engage that way. And it's one of the single best things I've done. So I'd encourage people to think about that more broadly. You can have massive impact with a pretty small amount of time.
Great. Love it. Shawna, how about you?
I'm going to go back to the basics and start with my original point number one. You think it's so obvious, e-commerce and marketing need to get married and live together forever in harmony. And it amazes me how still in these days, a lot of big organizations really don't see that. And I think because I'm at a smaller direct consumer business right now with FSA store, when it's smaller, you can kind of see all parts. You see it all in 360 view, and you really get to be right at the center of it. You see how it needs to work like that. And I just wish that some of these bigger organizations would take that lesson and save themselves a lot of heartache, because they can't compete with these smaller companies because they're just holding themselves back in this way.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, Billy, what do you got?
I mean, I'm a big advocate for constant learning. So I think through COVID, a lot of us are stuck at home. That presents an opportunity. But set aside that time, like carve it out, set aside the time. Certainly participate in events like Commerce Next, but be a strong advocate for your own learning and taking time, investing it, following along. You never know where opportunities come from. Good ideas come from anywhere. I think that's an important piece. I think that 2021 is one more than 2020, so that's a good thing. Take the time if you're an analytic to challenge yourself creatively. If you're more creative, challenge yourself analytically. That doesn't math isn't scary, and at the same time, being creative and having a creative outlet shouldn't be scary either. So the balance between the two creates beautiful music. So make that a goal for 2021.
I love that. And that was a common thread. The thing and I'm sure the thing's about to cut off on us, but if it doesn't, before I finish the sentence, I love the point you guys made about communication. And I think for everyone, as we said at the very beginning, all your orgs are going to be different out there in the audience. You know, in some cases you'll make changes like Billy talked about. In some cases you'll change the workflow like Vanja talked about. In some cases you'll get what you need around the balance between creative and data, as Shawna and Jennifer were pointing out. I think even if you don't have those things, over communicate. Make sure you're extending yourself to the people that aren't inside the org, so they understand what's happening in the business. They understand what you're delivering and where you need help. And also, you know, part of communication is obviously listening. Hearing, you know, if you sit down and listen to creatives, when you share the data, you'll hear how much they love the fact that they're being asked to make 12 versions of what to them is the exact same ad for your Facebook campaigns. And it'll be really eye-opening when you realize, like, oh my gosh, that is a crazy amount of work. Maybe I should call Vanja and figure out how to automate some of that. All right. With that note, hopefully I'll see some of you at the mixology sessions. Thank you, panel. And again, thanks so much, Commerce Next people.
Thank you.